Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Hall of Fame Committee, it's my pleasure to welcome all of our honorees, their guests, and friends to the induction of the 7th class of the Kansas City Golf Hall of Fame. I want to begin by recognizing the other members of our committee. First, my good friend and co-conspirator, a member of the Missouri Golf Hall of Fame, Jack Garvin. Martha Linscott, a multiple-time qualifier for USGA events, winner of the Kansas Women's Mid-Amateur this year, and the Mid-Am and Senior Women's Player of the Year. Past president of Central Links Golf, Greg Dunn, 2020 Hall of Fame honoree and longtime general manager and head professional at Heritage Park Golf Course, Rob Wilkin, executive director Doug Habel, and to several of you, several other members of the Hall of Fame who are here today, a special welcome to you. This is a labor of love for all of us on the committee. And unfortunately, we only get to do it every other year. Back in 2012, the Kansas City Golf Association was celebrating its centennial. And the Hall of Fame Committee was one part of our recognition of 100 years of serving golf and golfers in this area. The goal then, as it is now under the banner of Central Links Golf, is to preserve our past and honor the accomplishments and contributions of those who laid the foundation for the game we love today. This year's class is a continuation of the standards we have set to make the Kansas City Golf Hall of Fame a cherished honor. As you can see from the list of the 24 previous honorees in your program, it's not the Hall of Pretty Good. It's not the Hall of Longevity. It's not the Hall of Friends and Buddies. It's the Hall of Fame. So without further ado, let me get started. A few years ago, the Hall of Fame Committee recognized that there was a time when even the most accomplished players had very few outlets to display their talents and to build a resume that would land them in the Hall of Fame. We needed to institute an avenue for their induction that was fair, and we came up with a committee selection. This year, we haven't done it very often, but this year we have exercised that route to honor Miss Carolyn Lee. It's time for a trip in the Wayback Machine, Sherman. The year was 1915. It was the first year of a group called the Kansas City Women's Golf Association. To give you some perspective, in 1915 there was a war going on. They didn't call it World War I, because who knew there was going to be another one? It was the Great War, you know, the war to end all wars. The U.S. wouldn't become part of the fighting until April of 1917. Golf clubs had wooden shafts. The USGA didn't allow steel shafts until 1924, and they didn't catch on for several more years. The golf ball of the time was the Haskell ball, made of solid rubber or with a liquid-filled center wound with rubber bands and covered in balata. The balata ball was, or the Haskell ball was introduced in 1901 and continued as a standard for more than 6 decades. Courses themselves were rather hard scrabble affairs. Mowing was done with horse-drawn equipment, and grass greens, where they existed, were cut with non-motorized hand mowers. Life was hard, and hard scrabble was the order of the day. Appropriate apparel for the time for women included long dresses or skirts, and usually a bonnet or hat. It wasn't until the early 20s that women even dared to sport knickers on the golf course. It should be mentioned that there were no ladies' tees or forward tees. Everyone played from the same ground, and course records in the upper 70s and low 80s were typical. I told you it was hard. In the teens, the game had become so popular in Kansas City that the wives and daughters of many of the golfers who populated our 11 courses had taken to the sport and formed an organization of their own. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but Hall of Fame member Miriam Burns, whose photograph you may have seen when you came in to the clubhouse here at Milburn, was not the only woman golfer in her family. Her mother, Mrs. Clinton Burns, and her grandmother, Mrs. A.F. Beery, were also avid golfers. We've recently come across an article from the Kansas City Times, I think it was April of 1920, that has it wasn't a photograph, it was a line drawing of the three of them all engaged in playing golf. Many of the early clubs in in what would become the KCGA, part of really the fledgling Kansas City Golf Association, may be unknown to you. Names like Evanston, Elmridge, part of the Jockey Club and Fair Association, Gates Park in Independence, Shawnee Heights, which later became Tomahawk Hills. Some are more familiar, like Kansas City Country Club, no longer Kenwood in 1915. It had moved to its second home where Luce Park is now. Oakwood, which opened in 1912, Mission Hills, also 1912, Swope Park Golf Course, that would be the free course just inside the gates of Swope Park, and Blue Hills, you know, the old Blue Hills. From this group came several very competent players, but the best of the lot on the women's side was Miss Carolyn Lee. Evanston was located about where Southeast High School is now, and just outside the gates of Swope Park, and they used Colonel Swope's home as their clubhouse. In 1916, they moved to a new course designed by Donald Ross. You've heard of him. They called it Hillcrest. So who was this Carolyn Lee? Well, she was born in 1889 in Chicago, and her family moved to Kansas City not long after. Miss Lee's father, Thomas, was in the cattle business, and by all accounts, he was quite successful. Carolyn took up the game and thrived. She won the very first Kansas City Women's Championship in 1915, played at the Old Blue Hills. She defended her title in 1916 at Kansas City Country Club, as I said, which is where Luce Park is now. The next year, she again made the final match, but lost to a woman whom she had defeated the year before, Mrs. Cranston. We don't know much about Miss Cranston, but apparently she was a heck of a player. At the Missouri State Championship at Hillcrest in 1918, the 29-year-old Miss Lee and Miss Cranston met yet again, and Carolyn prevailed in what would be the first of 3 consecutive Missouri Women's State Championships. That 1920 tournament was notable for another reason, because in the semifinals, a young Miriam Burns showed up for the first time. Already the city match play champion, this future Kansas City Hall of Famer, and 1927 U.S. Women's Amateur Champion, would go on to an illustrious, if relatively short career, winning 7 city and 2 state titles, along with the Trans Miss and 2 Women's Western Amateurs. No wonder she's in the Hall of Fame. After Miriam Burns, and about the same time, a fellow Hall of Famer named Opal Hill came on the scene. Carolyn frankly struggled to keep up. She lost the 1924 city finals to Miss Burns, and lost to Hill in the 1925 final and the 1926 semifinals. After an outstanding amateur career, Miss Hill, by the way, would go on to become one of the 13 founding members of the Ladies Professional Golf Association when it was formed during the U.S. Women's Open at Rolling Hills in 1950. Miriam Burns seemed to have Miss Lee's number in the Missouri State Championship as well. As medalist, trying to make it 4 titles in a row, the now 32-year-old Carolyn Lee fell to the 18-year-old Miriam Burns in the 1921 and then again in the 1922 tournaments. That was the first tournament after the founding of the Missouri Women's Golf Association. And reports say there were some 200 entries and a gallery of more than 400 that followed the final action. Miss Lee's match play record in the Missouri Women's Amateur was a staggering 26-3. In 1923, Carolyn Lee won the tri-state title, that was Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma, defeating Miriam Burns in the semifinals, and won the Missouri Valley Championship, featuring players from Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, and Nebraska. Around 1930, the never-married Carolyn Lee returned to Evanston, Illinois, where she lived until moving to Florida, where she died in November of 1974 at the age of 85. She is interred at Memorial Park Cemetery, across from her beloved Hillcrest Country Club. The Hall of Fame Committee is proud to have chosen Miss Carolyn Lee as a committee selection to join the 2024 class of the Kansas City Golf Hall of Fame. Now, to accept the award on behalf of the new ownership of Hillcrest is Central Links Golf Board member Doug Albers. Doug.
Well, this is a tremendous honor for Carolyn, and on behalf of the ownership of Hillcrest. I'm not an owner, but I did help in some consulting that they're doing on a major renovation to restore that club to its prominence. Should be open in 2026, and be very excited to display this and have Carolyn honored as part of Hillcrest's tremendous history. It's the second oldest club in Kansas City, which I don't know if you knew that, but excited for this, and well deserved. So thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is my friend and co-conspirator, Jack Garvin.
Thank you, Don.
We have served on the Hall of Fame committee since its inception.
With pleasure. All right, Marty Salays, Clinton High School, 1975, Mizzou, 1979. Just wanted to get that out there and let you all know that those are the facts, okay? For competitive amateur golfers, there are various venues that they try to excel in and find success. One is their state amateur championships, which are held once a year, sometimes lasting as much as a week if you make it all the way, which Marty did. The Missouri Amateur has been played 118 times, just to put a little history onto this, since 1905. And the Kansas Amateur has been played 114 times since 1908. And Marty has won both of those. Won the Missouri Amateur in 1990 at Hallbrook, and he won the Kansas Amateur at the Kansas City Country Club in 1995. He was also runner-up 3 times in the Kansas Amateur. So that was another week-long tournament, wasn't it, Marty? Yeah. And he was medalist in 1996. Okay, that's the first venue in which golfers try to achieve success. The second is in the 36-hole tournaments that are conducted on 2 days throughout the state of Missouri and Kansas also. One of those is the Phil Cotton Tournament in Columbia, and another is the Jim Dawson Tournament in Jefferson City. And these are held in June and August of every year, or have been since about 1959. And Marty won the Cotton twice and the Dawson once. And not to be ignored is also his victory in the Missouri 4-ball, but he had a champion partner named Don Bliss. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Don Bliss. But Marty was able to choose a good partner, and I'm sure they ham and egged it. At the Kansas Mid-Amateur, Marty was 4-time champion, and those are 2-day, 36-hole events as well. A third venue, we may call them the United States Golf Association qualifiers, of which there are several each season. And I'll just go through the order of Marty's successes in qualifying for these tournaments. The U.S. Mid-Amateur, 1983, 1984, 1986, 1998, 2011. So a grand total of 5 mid-amateurs that he was able to play in and qualified here in Kansas City. The U.S. Open Local Tournament, 1986, 1990, 1994, and 1996, so 4 times. And at the U.S. Open, of course, he's competing against amateurs and professionals, the best in the area of the Kansas City area and the Midwest in some cases. A third venue that we may call them, well, I just went through the third venue, I'm sorry. I think that we have probably had enough of the high points in Marty's golfing career, and he and I were talking before the lunch here today about his college career, and I don't know if we should go into that a whole lot, but he did play some in college, lettered at Missouri State, and went back to Missouri to finish up, and that's how that happened. But and then just kind of took off some time in his 20s to play golf, to not play golf. Moved to Chicago, got busy with earning a living, and just pretty much took a vacation away from the game of golf for a few years. And then in about, what would we say, mid-20s, late 20s, took it up again, and the rest is history, as we say. I think we have enough of the high points in Marty's golfing career. I'll just say he's a true sportsman, a great competitor, and a true friend. Marty Salais. Thank you, Marty.
Some of you may know this. I know there are a few out there that I really don't like talking about myself. So, and there are some people out there that have wagered that how long he can stand up here and do this. So, you know, as a little kid, I loved playing sports and all kinds of sports, and my parents both worked, so in the summertime, they had to find a babysitter for me, and I was getting too old to have a babysitter, so they joined. There were 2 country clubs in my hometown of Clinton, and I loved to swim, and so they joined one of the country clubs because they could drop me off. I could swim all day, and then I could be picked up in the evening. And one day, the lifeguard who was on the high school golf team asked me something about golf, and I'm like, I don't know anything about it. And the next day I showed up, and he had some golf clubs for me. And he sent me off, he gave me a few pointers and sent me off to play golf at Clinton Country Club, and I quit swimming. I could be dropped off and play golf all day long, and it was a sport that I didn't need another team to compete against or teammates to play with. I could do it by myself, and I fell in love with it. It wasn't a very good golf course because it had sand greens, no irrigation, no agronomy, and it was really hard to find your golf ball amongst all the dandelions. So the next year, I was 10 years old, and the new country club in town, I was old enough to be dropped off there. So they had grass greens, and we my parents joined there, and they dropped me off every day, and I played golf all day long. And I had a goal in high school to get a college scholarship and go play college golf, and I was fortunate. I think I had a pretty good senior year. I remember I qualified for the state high school golf tournament, and it was at Excelsior Springs, and I finished that tournament. I think I finished sixth. Payne Stewart finished fifth, and I think Tom Pernice finished eighth or ninth. So I think I was in pretty good company. So I went to Southwest Missouri State, played golf there and lettered, as Jack mentioned. But I was disgruntled with the program, so I told my parents I wanted to go to MU, went to MU, had to sit out a year because of the NCAA rules. And the coach said, I don't think you can play and beat anybody on the team, so I gave up golf. I decided I'd work on my academics, get a good job, which that all proved out to be good. And I moved to Chicago with Price Waterhouse and was having a great time in Chicago. And one day, one of my coworkers said, do you play golf? And I said, well, yeah. So we started playing on Saturdays, and I started getting the bug again. And so I'd book myself a tee time in the afternoon. So I'd play Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. Then I started booking myself a tee time on Sunday. Finally, I said, this is crazy. I could probably move back. I could move to Kansas City and probably join a country club and play a lot more golf. The season's longer. So I asked Price Waterhouse to transfer me, and they did. And I got to Kansas City in July of '82. And one day I sat down with the phone book, and I was going to call all the clubs in town and join a club. So I Blue Hills, Indian Hills, Mission Hills. And every time, the answer wasn't good. If you got to ask how much it is to join, you probably can't afford it. Well, I got to the end of the list, and it was a W, and it was Wolf Creek. And Craig Harrison answered the phone, and he said, well, how old are you? And I said, I'm 25. And he said, well, we got a special program, for juniors. It's $500 to get in. And I said, well, what do I need to do? And he said, just come out here and give us $500, and you're in. They were looking for members. So I said, well, tell me how to get there. So I scratched down his directions. I said, I'll be there in 30 minutes. So I was in. That was a Saturday afternoon. So as I recall, I went out Sunday morning to play, and Jeff Bury grabbed me. And he goes, hey, I know the guys you need to play with. And he took me out to the first tee. And here was Ron Brewer and Fred Rowland and Danny Mullen, and they all wanted to take my money. So this was going on for a while. We were gambling and playing golf, and it wasn't to my liking, so I needed help. So there was this older gentleman there that I heard he was pretty good. And so I went to him. His name's Buster Mills. And I said, Buster, I need your help. I can't beat these guys. And so Buster took me down to the range, and Buster couldn't see very well. And I'd hit a shot, and he goes, well, he'd look at my divot, and he'd say, where'd it go? And he'd say, this is what you're doing. This is what you need to correct. So we did that. But the one thing Buster gave me, he told me about a putting method that he used when he played the tour. And I adopted that, and it worked. Some people told me it would never work, but it did. Fred. So that's how it all got started. And Jack's told about the rest. You know, it's not about what I won or anything like that. It's all about the friendships I made. One amazing story, it happened early. It was somehow I qualified for the Kansas Amateur in '83, and it was being played at Prairie Dunes. And someone set me up with a family to stay with that week. And as Jack mentioned, you know, it can be a whole week. And I played well that week. I don't know how, but I did. And I made it to the semifinal. And I think it was Friday evening. I was staying with Frank and Barbara Jackson that week. And every day I'd get up early and go to the golf course and play. And then I'd stay late and practice. And I came home, and Barbara was there trying. They were older people, and they were trying to eat healthy. And she's like, "Why don't you go shower up? Would you like a scotch, you know?" And I'm like, "Well, sure." And then she's like, "We're having some grilled fish and vegetables." I'm like, "That's great." This went on all week. And I think it was Friday evening, and Frank said to me, he said, "Do you like cognac?" And I'm like, I'm 25. I'm like, I don't know. Don't think I've ever had it. And he said, you know, in World War II, I was there when we raided Hitler's bunker. And I got this bottle of cognac I've never opened. So we had some cognac. It's just the friendships and the memories. It's not about the championships. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Greg Dunn is going to introduce Tom Pernice Jr. and his family.
I've known Tommy's for over 50 years. And some of the people in this room, his family, Tom Round, Dave Round, Coach Rice. So it's a privilege to welcome Tommy to the Kansas City Golf Hall of Fame. I don't really want to go through all of his accomplishments. They're pretty big accomplishments for over a long period of time. But I have picked out 3 years that I think are important in Tommy's life and kind of instructive to hear the stories. First year is 1977. This year Tommy graduated from Raytown High School. And to know Tommy, he was very competitive as a young man or young boy. He wasn't very big. He wrestled at Raytown High School a couple years at some absurdly low weight class. I can't, 98 pounds. So he wasn't real big, but he was a hard worker. And in the old saying, dig it out of the dirt, that was Tommy. But I was talking to Tom Round, there were about 8 or 10 of us that played golf at Cracker Neck from about 12 years old to 17 years old. And Tommy wasn't the best player. He was really good, but he wasn't the best player out of that group. But he played well in high school, and got better every year. And by his sophomore and junior year, he continued to get a little better. And he played well. He had a little bit of a breakthrough his senior year of high school, which was 1977. I think he was runner-up in the Missouri Junior Am. He was sixth place in the Missouri High School tournament. And he had a dream of playing golf for a university on the West Coast. And somehow he had it in his mind that he could play at UCLA. And it seemed at the time people just didn't do that. They went to Warrensburg, they went to University of Missouri, and Tommy was going to play at UCLA. And frankly, people thought at the time then, and I think it now when I was going through all his accomplishments, his resume was pretty thin to play at UCLA, but that didn't stop Tommy. He had somebody that put in a good word for him, and he went out there and he sold himself, and he promoted himself, and the guy who was the golf coach at UCLA, big name in the golf business, Eddie Mehrens. He was also the head pro at Bel Air Country Club. And I found an article in the Kansas City Star from July of 1977 and talked about Tommy. The article was about Tommy, but one of the things in the article was where he was going to go to college. And this was in late July of 77. And he said, well, I haven't made that decision yet. I'm looking at New Mexico, I'm looking at University of Missouri, I'm looking at UCLA. And I talked to Tommy a week or so ago, and I didn't really know the story for sure. Tommy did qualify for the U.S. Junior that year and made match play and won a match, which was, I believe, really his first tournament on the national level. And he showed he could compete on the national level. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, Eddie Mehrens took a liking to me, and he said, you can come play. He said, but I've only got a half scholarship for you. And then he said, you're going to have to caddy at Bel Air Country Club. And when I talked to Tommy, he talked to me more about caddying than he did playing golf. He really enjoyed it, and he met a lot of people. And he wanted me to mention he has a longtime friend, Peter Ueberroth, who baseball commissioner, head of the Olympics in L.A. That's a longtime friend, lifetime friend of Tommy's from his caddying. So that I don't think Tommy would have achieved all he did if he didn't get that accomplished to play at UCLA. And it was a good decision for Eddie Mehrens. Tommy was two-time All-American, three-time All-Conference, captain of the team, Pac-10 Player of the Year his junior year. So he did all those things. And Tommy's dream from when he was 13 years old was he wanted to play on the PGA Tour. And so when he left UCLA, he followed the route at the time was to try to play on the Asian Tour and then go to tour school. And there were a lot of people, familiar names on the Asian Tour with him, Payne Stewart, Don Walsworth, later years, Brant Jobe, a lot of Americans over there. And Tommy described it as a grind, but a really good experience and pretty good money. But he couldn't get, he had trouble getting through tour school, and he finally got through in 1986, and he made it on the tour. And so his goal was accomplished. Going to fast forward to 1996. I wasn't close to Tommy anymore. We'd kind of gone our separate ways. But I ran into him at the U.S. Open sectional qualifying in St. Louis. I was actually caddying for Marty, and probably cost him 6 or 7 shots over 36 holes. But I caddied for Marty, and he had his little Sunday bag, and I think we put 4 golf balls in it. And so I caddied Boone Valley in St. Louis, 36 holes with this little Sunday bag. Well, Tom Pernice was there too. And this part's hard. Jerry Relihan was his caddy. And Tom had this tour bag about the size of this podium. And I think he had 2 or 3 rain suits in there, probably 5 or 6 towels. You've carried the bag, Anthony.
Well,
you know.
Not to interrupt, that day was so hot.
Oh, yeah.
We were there. and
Yeah.
Jerry couldn't finish caddying.
Right.
And so I had to pick up the bag and finish caddying. It was a hot day and a heavy
I
bag.
was making fun of Jerry. I saw him on an adjacent fairway, and I went like this with Marty's bag. And Jerry's going like this. And I don't know, I don't think I'm divulging any secrets, but Tommy could be a difficult personality to deal with on the golf course. And my memory is that he was that way that day. I don't know, I don't remember what it was, but if there was something about the golf course or something about the event that Tommy didn't like, he was going to let you know about it. And he was letting Tom O'Toole and the St. Louis crowd know about it. And so I was caddying for Marty, but I was watching Tommy and Jerry, out of the corner of my eye all day long. And everybody knew Tommy was there. And this wasn't a high point in his career. But he had the big bag. He was dressed impeccably. And so everybody knew he was there, knew who he was. And the problem with golf is it's a hard, cold game. You got to put a number up next to your name. And Tommy did that. He was a medalist. And I think 2 players qualified. I tried to find the results, and I couldn't find who the other qualifier was, but Tommy qualified for Oakland Hills, Detroit, Michigan. Went up there and played well, made the cut, played all 4 rounds, tied Phil Mickelson, finished 1 stroke behind Tiger Woods. And so that kind of opened my eyes when I saw that result when I was researching for today. Tommy made it through tour school again in 1996. Got out on tour and never went to tour school again. Won 2 times, multiple top 3s, top 5s, impressive number of cuts made. Had a great career on the PGA Tour. I'm going to fast forward to 2009, September. Tommy's just turned 50 years old. He's still playing the tour, but now he's eligible for what they called the senior tour at the time. Very first tournament he was eligible for, he won it. He won 6 times on the senior tour. He's still the 37th all-time leading money winner on the senior tour. He's done not just the wins, but it's the longevity too, and the longevity fits Tommy's personality. He told me the only person he thought that worked as hard as him was Vijay Singh. Tommy is very fit, and he's very determined. And I think the only player this year on the tour that's been on the tour as long as Tommy was Bernhard Langer. And Bernhard has those same qualities. So it wasn't always easy, but Tommy knew where he wanted to go, and he got there. And I think he's one of the 3 best players to ever learn and play the game in Kansas City. So I'm really pleased to welcome him into the Kansas City Golf Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, Tommy plays in a tournament every year at Pebble Beach. Is it a member, or is it a professional event? But anyway, Pro-Am. And the notice was a little short for him this year, but he was disappointed he couldn't be here. But I had a nice conversation with him, and his brother Anthony is going to accept the award on his behalf.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to just read a letter here. On behalf of my brother Tom, we'd like to express our great sincere gratitude to the Kansas City Golf Association for this incredible honor. Tom is truly humbled to be recognized in this way. Tom's passion for golf ignited early on. Inspired by the legendary Tom Watson, he dedicated himself to the game. The Kansas City Junior Golf Association played a pivotal role in nurturing his talent, provided him with numerous opportunities to compete in tournaments and learn from experienced players. Tom feels very strongly about the junior golf program as it is invaluable. They inspire young boys and girls to dream big and to aspire to reach the highest levels of the game, just as he and Tom Watson did. The Kansas City Golf Association has done so much for countless golfers like Tom. It's an organization that fosters a love for the game and provides a platform for aspiring golfers to reach their full potential. Thank you again for this honor. Appreciate it.
Before I bring up our final speaker, I'd like to say a few words about Charles Lewis. I don't get a chance to talk about people who have been cited in the congressional record very often. But in 2003, Congressman Dennis Moore commended Mr. Lewis and put into the record an article from the Kansas City Star detailing an event from his amateur days that's quite interesting. Now, I don't think a man's career should be distilled down to one day in one tournament, so I won't do that. But let me say a little bit about Charles Lewis. His grandfather was a golf professional in Devonshire, England, before coming to the U.S. and taking a job at Hardscrabble Country Club in Fort Smith, Arkansas. His father, Junior, was a golf pro at the Country Club of Little Rock. His uncle, Paul, was also a golf professional in Little Rock. Got this right so far? So it's no wonder that Charles III would gravitate to golf. He made it through local qualifying for the U.S. Open 7 straight years from 1970 to 1976. He served in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. Thank you for your service. He won the Arkansas Amateur. He tried the PGA Tour for a bit. He worked as an assistant under 2013 Kansas City Golf Hall of Fame honoree Duke Gibson at Blue Hills, the old Blue Hills. He became head professional at Mission Hills in 1975 and served the members there for 30 years. And he served on the advisory board of the Junior Golf Foundation of Greater Kansas City. All that to say, Mr. Lewis richly deserves the honor we're bestowing on him today. But about that one day. In the 1960 United States Amateur at St. Louis Country Club, the 19-year-old playing in his first major amateur tournament made it to match play and dispatched his first 3 opponents. Then in round 4, he faced the defending champion, kind of pudgy kid from Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. You might know his name, Jack Nicklaus. Not only was he the defending champion, but he had also finished runner-up to Arnold Palmer in the U.S. Open just a few months earlier, before a crowd that was estimated at over 5,000 people. Lewis birdied the first hole and never looked back. His 5-3 win was called the greatest match play upset of the 20th century by Golf World magazine. He continued to surprise the experts, making it to the semifinals where he ultimately lost to Bob Gardner 2-1. But getting that far guaranteed him a spot in the 1961 Masters Tournament. As I said, no player's career should be defined by one day in one event. But on that day, that week, Charles Lewis III showed the world he could play the game. Now, I'd like to introduce Jeff Bury to say a few words about Charlie.
Wow, what a class. Let's give him a hand. Don and Doug Hable, thank you for this opportunity. I just am honored to get to say a few words about C3 and talk from more of a personal standpoint. I mean, his career has been unbelievable. And before I do that, I want to just say congratulations, Marty, who's one of my all-time favorite people in the whole world, and I just have so much love and respect for you as one of my members, and I remember the first day out at Wolf Creek. Pernice family, wow. Tommy, too, out at Wolf Creek and all this stuff. And quick story there, I got a phone call one day from a fellow in California named Eddie Marins. I was at Pinehurst at the time, and he says, I got this young man who's just qualified for the U.S. Amateur, and he said he's going to be all by himself in Pinehurst. Can you kind of look after him? And I said, yes, sir. What's his name? And he said, Tom Pernice. And I said, oh, Tom Pernice. I said, I've heard that name. I knew he was on your team, and I assumed he was from Los Angeles. So when we moved to Kansas in 1981, one of the first people I met was Tom Pernice, and I didn't realize he was from Kansas City. So that whole week of the U.S. Amateur, when he was there practicing and playing, I never realized he was a Kansas City man. He was thought he was a California guy. So anyhow, and I wasn't around to meet your first inductee, but what a story. Thank you. And okay, got a couple notes here, and I've got a little leeway. I heard. Just thank you, Don, for that. But let's see what I've got here. Yeah. You know, my role is to really introduce Charles Lewis III, and what an honor. I got a couple quick stories that I think are personal and special. Kathy and I came to Kansas in February of 1981, and we didn't know anybody in Kansas City. Kathy from Florida, me from Connecticut. We came from Pinehurst. One of the first few phone calls I got were from three guys. A guy named Stan Thirst called me, a guy named Bud Williamson called me, and a guy named Charles Lewis called me. And they said, welcome to town. We're happy you're here, and anything we can do to help you get settled in, fantastic. I'll never forget that. Those three guys, legends of Kansas City, made our introduction here just so easy. We traveled 1,100 miles and to get here, and in an ice and snowstorm, and never looked back. Charlie, also that first year I was here, he invited me to play in the team championship down at the Lake of the Ozarks. Remember that, Charles? And we had the Midwest section and the Gateway section had this tournament every year, and it was really fun and competitive, and we weren't real competitive. I was terrible. Charles was playing well, but I wasn't. And but I had the greatest time just getting to know him for a couple days and spending that time down there. It was really neat. One of the things that was really unique and interesting about the Midwest section is on Mondays when we'd have tournaments, oftentimes the wives would come with us, and while we played, and they'd hang out together. And I'll never forget, Marilyn and Charles were there, and Audrey and Stan, and Susan and Bud, and we'd have all the. It was kind of like a really close group. I don't know if it continued. That probably doesn't happen now, but that was really special to have those Mondays. You know, after retiring, Charles came out to Wolf Creek, and it was really great. And he has so many friends that are here today that played a lot of golf with him. And this guy, I got to tell you, he is just one of the nicest, most positive, smiling people you'll ever meet. And I get a big smile on my face every time I see Charles and get a hug. Two stories that I wasn't going to tell, but I got permission to tell. And one is Junior, Charles' dad. I'll try to get this right now, Charlie. He wanted a fellow named Labron Harris in Stillwater to take a look at his son's golf swing. So Charles got in his car, and I don't know how many miles it is from Little Rock to Stillwater, but Charles drove over there and got there, and it began to rain. There was a downpour. And you couldn't, it was raining cats and dogs. So Charles goes in the golf shop, and Mr. Harris is there. He coached Oklahoma State too, wasn't he, as well as head pro there. And he says, Charles, the range is right there. Why don't you take your clubs and go out and hit some balls, and I'll stay here in the shop and watch you hit them. And Charles said, no, thank you. Put his clubs back in the car and drove all the way back to Little Rock, never hitting a shot. So the other story, and it segues into the Nicklaus story. I don't know anybody who can say they played probably the greatest player in the world ever, in Jack Nicklaus, and beat him in match play, and then played an 18-hole round of golf at Augusta National with Ben Hogan. And so after playing 18 holes, I think the Hawk, Ben Hogan, was in one of his trances where he was focused the whole day and didn't say a word to Charles. They get into the locker room after, and there's no more intensity than, and Hogan relaxes, and he says, Charles, how's Junior? How's your dad? And they just had the greatest conversation and get together, and it was like a totally different person. Close, Charles? Close? Okay. I have the privilege and the honor to invite or induct Charles Lewis III into the Kansas City Golf Hall of Fame, and the award's going to be accepted by Linda Hicks. And Linda, if you'd come up and grab it, it'd be great, and Don will get you set up. And Charles, would you stand up and just say hello to everybody?
We don't do this every day.
There you go. No, I don't need to be in there.
You're already in there. You may not know it.
I'll stand over here and keep my head down. Thank you.
Well, in 2026, there will be another class to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Who will it be? I wish I could tell you, but we have a long list of about, Jack, 30, 35 potential nominees that we will consider as a committee in 2 years. And when we come up with those names, and by the way, I didn't mention that all of these honorees were voted on by a fairly broad group of electors. The members of the Central Links Board of Directors, all the living members of the Hall of Fame, unless their ballot got lost in the mail, Fred, representatives of Midwest Section PGA, and representatives of the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America. So, as I said, it's not the Hall of Pretty Good. It's the Hall of Fame. Well, I hope we'll see a lot of you back here or in our next induction in 2 years. And thank you very much for being here.